put out this report, and so it was called the High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero Emissions Commitments of Non-State Entities. And so it's a big, heavy term because it was a UN document, right? And there were 10 sets of best practices in this document. It was announced at COP27 in Egypt last year. And we don't need to worry about all of them here because I think the top 3 are the most relevant, right? If you want to have a net zero goal, it's got to be, net zero by 2050 is the goal we're aiming for globally. And you can't just set a long-term goal. You have to have targets along the way, right? Second, we got to make sure we're covering all gases, all greenhouse gases, all scopes of emissions, and including consideration of embedded emissions, so things that fall under scope 3, right? And the third one is the point I was making before. There are some offsets that are going to be necessary in the net zero world. We are going to have to be doing some removal from the atmosphere because there are simply activities through which we generate greenhouse gas emissions that we just can't get to zero. Agriculture being among them, some agricultural emissions. But we have to save all of the energy and effort that it's going to take to do that carbon removal through direct air capture for those purposes. So if your organization or company has an activity that generates emissions where it's technologically possible to remove those emissions, to reduce them and get them to zero, we got to do that. You got to get them to zero because we need to save the removal for the things we cannot eliminate. Right? And that's sort of the final argument. And so the advisory body I'm a part of with the federal government, Net Zero Advisory Body, when we were launched 2.5 years ago, we put together a set of values and principles, so 10 sort of 5 principles, 5 values that basically inform all of our work. And this came from reviewing all the literature and expertise on net zero that's out there, basically. And we don't need to talk about all of them here today, but there's 2 of our principles that are quite relevant to what I've been talking about, and I think to the challenges that all of you have in your industry. The first one is what I was saying. We can't get caught in the net of net zero, right? Don't try to overly rely on offsets. We really need to work to get the emissions to zero, right? And the second one is on these pathways, we got to watch out for the dead ends, right? There are a lot of activities that will do marginal emissions reductions, but are not compatible with getting to zero, right? And remember, we're not in the emissions reduction paradigm anymore. We're trying to eliminate emissions. Best example I can give to you is from outside your industry, but for years, North America set up this entire infrastructure and industry to blend ethanol into gasoline for use in passenger vehicles. But all that can get is at best a marginal reduction in emissions, maybe 10, 20%, right? And arguably probably not even that much, right? Whereas the solution for passenger vehicles, as we're seeing, is moving away from using liquid fuels at all and moving to electricity. It's a different story for heavier vehicles, but for passenger vehicles, it's clear. But then we put this whole infrastructure together around ethanol, and it's now going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to affect a lot of people's jobs to transition away from it. So we got to watch out for those dead ends because they will hurt us on the path to net zero. And so the way I often think about this problem, I don't know if anyone here is a baseball fan, but if anyone played baseball growing up, you were taught, don't slide into first base, right? This is a problem where we can't just narrowly beat the tag to get to a target that we have for 2030. We need to be running past the base and getting for home. And home is net zero. Thanks, everybody.